I'll ask the question. What's the next step now? Where do you go from here?
The next step now is to confer with the United States Attorney's Office and to determine if there's still the possibility of reaching some other type of plea agreement. It may very well be, given the court's comments today, that nothing is going to satisfy the court short of a trial. And while that's something that we had considered, we were hopeful that this agreement would be accepted based upon all the factors that we outlined, but obviously the court sees it a different way, and perhaps he wants a trial, and that's a real possibility.
Is he ready for a trial? Can Mr. Baca, health-wise, emotionally, sit through a trial?
His health is a great concern to us as to whether he can withstand a significant trial of this length, because we expect it to be much longer than any of the other trials, because there's a lot more evidence that would be presented on the defense side. But we'll have to just deal with that as it comes.
Sir, what about the notion of withdrawing the guilty plea? Give us your reaction to that.
Well, the court obviously felt that a higher sentence was warranted. Apparently, even in spite of the fact that there was substantial evidence from his doctors about what he's suffering from, that he is suffering from Alzheimer's, that the Alzheimer's has now become dementia, so it's more serious than originally diagnosed. And so, therefore, I think based on that, plus other factors, the sentence was appropriate under our view.
So what are the factors you are going to now have to consider, Mike, in determining your next step?
Well, first we have to talk with the U.S. Attorney's Office and determine what they're thinking and whether there is a possibility of some middle ground. I'm not sure what position they're going to take on that. And if they're not open to that, then I think you're going to see a trial in this case.
Mr. Baca looks stunned. Is that a fair way to put his reaction?
It was something that we had spoken about, but as a possibility, but it was not something that we anticipated, given the fact that the government was so strong in their statements to the court about the fact that they did not have the evidence to put him in the obstruction type of case. The judge seemed to ignore that and simply feel that he was responsible for all of it.
Given Mr. Baca's mental condition, you've talked about that the disease has progressed to some extent to dementia. Is that going to interfere or handicap your ability to have him as a viable client in front of the court?
That the ability to defend an individual in his state in any trial is a very, very difficult task, and it affects any proceeding that you're involved in.
Do you think the judge would accept a sentence equal to Tanaka, or maybe even a year longer? Is that what the judge was implying today?
I can't divine what the judge was thinking.
Would Mr. Baca accept a 5-year deal?
No.
No way.
Is there anything that you have in the way, or any discussions with the U.S. Attorney about potentially a longer sentence than 6 months? Did that happen before?
No.
Could you characterize Mr. Baca's reaction
to the substance?
to this?
The substance of what Judge Anderson said in regards to Mr. Baca's higher level of responsibility and the need to restore trust.
Well, I don't believe that that's consistent with the evidence, and the government doesn't believe that it's consistent with the evidence because they've said so in their papers. And so the fact of the matter is that the two parties that are going to be responsible for evaluating these facts and presenting them in court have already said that they believe that this case is about false statements. It's not about obstruction.
If there is a trial, if you decide to go to a trial, will there be more charges filed against Mr. Baca?
I fully expect there will be.
I mean, a whole gamut. I mean,
I fully expect that's the way the U.S. Attorney operates.
with the same judge.
Perhaps with the same judge.
Could you paper him?
It's something we would have to examine.
Did you consider letting the judge move ahead today, or that was never a consideration?
That was never a consideration.
And what did Mr. Baca say? Did you share anything about his reaction?
He was stunned. Everyone expect, including the government prosecutors, to walk in here and resolve this matter. But the fact of the matter is that this judge wasn't interested in that. I wish I had known that earlier.
You had no hint at all. You felt blindsided today.
Well, we were blindsided. And we provided the information to the court early. That's why we went to sidebar about his medical condition. And he took the information, He considered it. We thought that that was a good indication of the fact that he was evaluating what was an appropriate sentence in this case. But apparently that was just, just part of his process.
Given the indication this judge has made in his ruling, he considers the person at top responsible for what happened, for all his subordinates and all their actions. Are you going to request another judge to hear a case if indeed this does go to trial?
There's certainly a legal option that permits that. Whether or not it's successful or even something that we're going to consider at this point, it's just too early to tell.
So what happens 2 weeks from now when you're back in front of the judge? What are you prepared to say to him?
I fully expect 2 weeks from now we're going to be in a position where we will have exhausted our conversations with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and as a consequence we'll know whether or not this case is either going to proceed to trial or whether or not some interim deal is going to be on the table.
When you talk about an interim deal, here's the thing. You said 0 to 6 months. Dave indicated, would you accept something along the lines of what happened to Mr. Tanaka? Is there middle ground between 0 to 6 months and 5 years that would be amenable to you and acceptable to Mr. Baca?
Well, there's a lot of middle ground between that as far as whether it's acceptable to all sides. At this point, I can't determine that.
Has he given you any indication of how long he would be prepared to stay in prison? A year, 2 years?
I'm just not going to talk about that.
Do you think the political atmosphere had anything to do with it? Obviously, we're in a time when people are questioning law enforcement more and more, and now we have the head of the largest agency in LA County lying. So, do you think that weighed into his thinking?
I don't know. I can't read the tea leaves with respect to what he was thinking.
There was one quote that the judge said, it's one thing to lie to the AUSA, it's another to be the top law enforcement officer of the county, to engage in a cover-up. Your reaction to that kind of rhetoric?
Well, I think the rhetoric is a misunderstanding of the evidence, which was outlined in detail by both parties, which is that the government's view is that my client was not involved in the corruption or obstruction case. He was interviewed nearly 2 years after, in April, and he gave 3 false statements while he was represented by county attorneys in a 5-hour interview. That's the conduct that's at issue, but clearly this judge wants to hold him accountable for everything that occurred, regardless of whether he was even present.
Can you explain a little bit why Mr. Baca should be separated from the rest of the pack? A lot of people don't know the specifics of the evidence that was presented by the U.S. Attorney and what made the others culpable and separated Sheriff Baca from them.
Well, the evidence is clear from, at least from the government's filings, that their view is that my client was not a participant in the obstructive conduct. They make clear that it was Mr. Tanaka that was organizing, directing all aspects of that particular operation, and really it was my client who gave a statement while he was sitting as county attorneys